It's here. The first trailer for Spider-Man No Way Home has finally been released, and it's chocked full of heroes, villains, and throwbacks to the comics. Today, I'm going to break down every little bit of that trailer and point out all the Easter eggs that I can. Now, the trailer leaked on Monday, which apparently forced the folks at Sony and Marvel Studios to officially push it out ahead of schedule. But before we get into the tiny little details of the trailer, I think it'd be best to sum up the plot, or as much about the plot as we can. Because this trailer finally gave us a rundown of the third Tom Holland flick story, we get to see a lot of new things here. If you remember the end of Spider-Man Far From Home, you'll recall that Mysterio outed Peter Parker as Spider-Man. In the after-credits scene, when Spider-Man is swinging around New York City, he was shocked to see J. Jonah Jameson's face appear on a big screen downtown and publicly share Mysterio's revelation with the world. No Way Home is the natural continuation of that story. Peter Parker struggles to live his life not only because he has to face down murderous villains, but also because the general public thinks that he's responsible for the drone attacks from Far From Home, and also Mysterio's death. The trailer shows us how Peter Parker's outing has affected not only his own life, but MJ's, Ned's, and even Aunt May's. It seems like Marvel's making a point to tell us that, yeah, even though this sucks, Peter Parker would be strong enough to bear it. After all, he spent his entire career in Marvel Comics being blamed by J. Jonah Jameson on a regular basis in the Daily Bugle. But now that Peter's identity as Spider-Man has ruined the lives of those he cares about, he needs to find a way to fix it, even if it's a little bit risky. So he goes to Doctor Strange and asks for help. Strange cautiously obliges and casts a spell to make everyone forget that Peter is Spider-Man. But in the midst of the spell, Parker starts talking, and the multiverse gets a little bit wonky. The end result is villains from Tobey Maguire's universe and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Universe crossing over and end up attacking Tom Holland's Spidey on a highway. That's where the trailer leaves off. If we use a bit of logic, then it would make sense if Holland lost that initial fight, but then discovered the Spider-Man of the other universes and teamed up with them in the end. So now that that story is out of the way, I want to go through all the little things that I saw in the trailer, because there were so many. The trailer opens with MJ and Parker sitting on a roof, reading an article about Spidey in the New York Post. You'll notice that this was the Daily Bugle, which historically was always just a newspaper. It seems like the Daily Bugle might only be available as a blog in the MCU, or more likely, a capable news network. In the next scene, we see MJ and Spidey swinging through New York City, in the middle of Times Square. In the background, every screen is illuminated with the J. Jonah Jameson ranting about how Spider-Man is in fact Peter Parker. Again, this plays up the new take on JJJ, who instead of being a newspaper tycoon, is a news pundit. This scene is also pretty significant because the MCU Spider-Man has only rarely swung around Manhattan. Until this point in his story, he's only been in Queens or Europe. So this is actually a pretty rare moment for Holland Spidey. This picture, with Spidey's mask on one half and Parker's on the other, is a throwback to Spectacular Spider-Man 120 from 1986. Whenever the writers want to emphasize the struggle Peter faces between being a superhero and being a good nephew and boyfriend, they like to show this image. The text, Public Enemy No. 1, is also a pretty standard Daily Bugle headline. In films prior, J. Jonah Jameson used to publish articles like Spider-Man, Hero or Menace, and Spidey and Doc Ock rob bank together. Next in the police station, the NYPD has Parker cuffed to a table. They're interrogating him about what exactly happened during his time studying abroad during the events of Far From Home. When Parker tries to explain that he didn't kill Mysterio and that it was the drones, which Mysterio controlled at the time, that did it, the cops wouldn't buy the story. One particularly snarky officer simply responded, "The drones? That were yours?" At this point in the MCU, it looks like Beck's accomplices, the former Stark employees who created the drones, were able to cover their tracks, and all the evidence points back to Parker. Which also raises a new question: killing Mysterio really wouldn't be that big of a deal in the MCU, would it? I mean, sure, that would make a few people think less of Spider-Man, but it wouldn't trigger all of the general backlash that we see in the trailer. Since the cop in this interrogation doesn't know that the drones were controlled by anyone other than Peter, then is the world holding Parker responsible for attack of the elementals in Venice and London? I think that's going to be the case. Otherwise, all of the Spidey hate just doesn't make sense. In the next scene, MJ and Peter are talking on the phone, and a few images of random Spidey haters are interwoven throughout. There's also this image of Parker with devil horns with the caption "Devil in Disguise" being held up by crazy old protesters in front of his school. Again, that level of hatred is a bit much for someone who killed the villain, even one who seemed like a good guy in a fight. I also want to hope that this is an allusion to Mephisto, who actually helped Peter Parker with a similar problem in the original comics. We'll see later that Doctor Strange erased the world's memory of Peter Parker, including MJ, which Peter worried might actually erase their entire relationship. Mephisto did more or less the same thing when he undid Peter and MJ's marriage in One More Day's story arc. A little later, we see Spidey and MJ standing on top of a bridge. This is a throwback to the time in the first Spidey movie when Green Goblin kidnapped Mary Jane, and Tobey's Spider-Man rescued not only her, but a cable car filled with kids. You'll also notice in this scene a ton of helicopters surrounding Spidey. I'm guessing this is right before he was taken into the police station for an interrogation. A few scenes later, while sitting at home with Aunt May, we see cop lights flashing on and off, and then it quickly cuts to the same interrogation room, but this time Ned and May are there. Maybe since they couldn't pin Parker when the cops first talked to him, they started to harass his friends and family to try and force Peter to turn himself in. When sitting at a restaurant, Peter takes a look at their Halloween decorations, among which are a string of wizard-shaped lights. Which is interesting because I have never seen any wizard-themed Halloween decorations. It's usually just ghosts, monsters, and witches, but also because this means No Way Home might actually take place in October and part of November, or if it's anything like a classy Tobey flick, it might spread the entire school year. Or maybe they just did this on purpose so that Peter would think of Doctor Strange, with him being a magician and all. Anyway, Peter suddenly realizes he could ask Doctor Strange for help, so he heads over to Sanctum Sanctorum, which you'll be glad to know looks more or less the same in this film. However, they haven't repaired the hole that the Hulk fell through during Infinity War. Doctor Strange is hovering ominously at the head of the stairs, which is a really nice touch. It's nice to see these superheroes do things that makes them unlike your average human, at even the most basic level, comic book style. So seeing Strange in his free time, just levitating around his house, is an awesome reminder that he is from a completely different magical part of the MCU. You'll notice that the Sanctorum is filled with snow for some unexplained reason, and while some staff are sweeping it up, Strange walks towards the fireplace, kindles a flame using magic, and asks how he can help. All the time he's wearing a hoodie beneath his cloak, which is an awesome throwback to his time at med school, because I think it says Columbia University, but I might be wrong on that. When Peter asks for help, he calls Strange Sir, which Doctor Strange complains is far too formal. When Peter then awkwardly calls him Stephen, Strange cringes a bit but allows it. This next part is important though. So we cut to a scene in a public cafeteria, maybe a shelter of some sort, and Holland's Spidey is dressed in the class black Spider-Man. I hope that this might be the same one from Tobey Maguire's films, but when I look a little bit closer, I notice the classic shoulder piece from the Iron Spider suit that Tony Stark made. Still, why is Spidey suddenly wearing a black suit? And where did it come from? In this scene, Parker is freaking out, looking like he's kind of punching at an enemy that's not there. It reminded me a bit of Peter Parker's behavior when fighting against Mysterio's drones. Now, I thought about this black suit a lot. I don't think it will be connected to Venom because, that's just too much to shove into this film. Sony could probably milk this multiverse story for at least 2 or 3 movies, and I don't think Venom needs to be added just yet. I think the black suit function might just be an upgrade to Spidey's classic Iron Spider suit. After wearing the Night Monkey's stealth costume in Europe, maybe Parker liked it so much that he wanted to have a black suit for fighting crime in New York City, and he asked Happy Hogan to let him use the suit-creating machine in Stark's jet. We've also seen in the toys that there's a lot more going on beneath the surface of the suit, which might mean that it's an upgrade to deal with Electro's attacks. That's my guess at least. Okay, so back to the conversation with Strange. Peter asks for help. He asks Strange if he can erase all knowledge of Spider-Man's true identity from the public. Wong walks by carrying suitcases. Apparently he's going on vacation. Before he leaves, he warns Doctor Strange not to cast the spell, which of course Strange does, after, rudely acknowledging it, but then doing what he wants anyways. Peter and Strange descend into a basement, and while Doctor Strange performs the spell, Peter keeps interrupting, asking if Strange can at least allow MJ and Aunt May to retain their memory. This causes some problems for the spell, which we'll eventually see leads to some pretty dangerous villains crossing into the universe. When the spell is nearly done, the Sanctorum breaks away and Peter and Strange float in an alternate reality. This could be just a random part of the multiverse, but we've only seen those deep black and purple colors in one place before, the Dark Dimension. I don't think that Strange would ever summon those powers, not after he learned how foolish his former master was, the Ancient One, had been when she tried to harness them. After all, it eventually led to Dormammu trying to destroy their entire world. Still, I can't help but feel that those colors and the fact that the spell has horrible consequences might mean that Strange harnesses the powers of the Dark Dimension, which also might be the whole reason that he has to team up with Scarlet Witch in Multiverse of Madness. After this, Doctor Strange narrates over scenes of reality warping, just like the first Doctor Strange movie, which featured New York City folding on itself in layered fractals. Here, apartments in Central Park itself begin to warp. Strange explains that they've messed with the multiverse, and not even he knows what will happen. A few important action scenes then pop up. A lightning storm, which seems to hint at the arrival of Electro, strikes a few NYPD vehicles and the Daily Bugle broadcasting van. Then, in the American Southwest, Doctor Strange stands on top of a train. For some reason, he's not wearing his cloak of levitation, which might have been lost in a fight or might be protecting someone else. Using a spell, Strange forms a circle of train cars around the main train, and it leaps off its tracks and starts flying into the sky. Maybe Spidey or Doctor Strange were teleported or abandoned in the desert, and without his cloak of levitation, Strange had to make a new way to get home quickly, hence a flying train. In the next scene, Spider-Man is holding a magical artifact. It seems to be important for resetting the multiverse and placing all of the respective heroes and villains in the right reality. Doctor Strange, for some reason, punches Spidey out of his body so that Peter Parker is separated and flying in the astral plane. We saw the Ancient One do this to Hulk in Endgame, and previously the Ancient One also did the same maneuver to Stephen Strange in his origin movie. There's also this scene, which I think features the Lizard scaring Happy Hogan in his car. I can't really make it out, but since we need to have some amazing Spider-Man villains here besides Electro, I'm betting on this one. Oh, and also, did you notice the sand in that scene with Electro? Could Sandman be returning? We cut quickly to a highway in New York City. There has already been an accident. In this part, Spidey is wearing his Iron Spider suit, and he unfurls his 4 additional metal talons, preparing for combat. A pumpkin bomb rolls down the street, and this is our first real confirmation that the villains of Tobey Maguire's universe are back. Willem Dafoe's laugh cackles over the video, and the vehicles in the road explode. Can we just stop here for a second? Because I'm pretty stoked. I didn't realize how much of my childhood was spent watching and thinking about those original Spider-Man films with Tobey. You probably remember what it was like in the early 2000s, but we had to wait years and years for comic book flicks. It's not like now when in a single year we can get 3 MCU movies, 2 Sony Spidey movies and random DC movies here and there, 3 Disney Plus shows, and all of the indie comic TV shows like The Boys or Jupiter's Legacy. Back then, you had to wait 3 years for a single good superhero movie. And they were so hit and miss. For every Spider-Man 2 that came out, you had to suffer through a Daredevil or Elektra or Ghost Rider. So what could you do except watch the awesome Spidey or X-Men flicks over and over and over again? That's why Green Goblin and William Dafoe's villainous antics were a huge part of my childhood, and I can't wait to see him come back. So a pumpkin bomb rolls onto the highway, the cars are destroyed, and then Doc Ock's legs climb out of a crater in the road and rocking those classic green glasses and a bunch of de-aging tech. Alfred Molina's character slyly says, "Hello, Peter. I haven't been this excited for a Spider-Man movie since Spider-Man 2 in 2004. I thought Sony was making a mistake not allowing Holland's Spider to go a few more movies before they did a giant team up with other Spider-Man, but at this point in the trailer, I'm going to admit I was wrong. I'm pumped. I'm ready. But here's the thing. The next shot shows us the same highway, but Spider-Man isn't wearing his Iron Spider suit. Instead, he's dressed in normal street clothes. I think that this trailer is showing us the events of the battle in the wrong order. First, I'm guessing Doc Ock arrives, then I'm guessing Spidey suits up, and then I think the other members of the MCU's Sinister Six arrive, and that's when we see Green Goblin's pumpkin bombs roll in. Like I mentioned earlier, I think the full Sinister Six teams up on Spidey in this fight, and it's after this that Tom Holland's Spider-Man discovers the Tobey and Garfield versions. Let me know what you guys think of the trailer. I'm super hyped for it. Hope you are too. Leave a like on this breakdown if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you're new. Hey, that rhymed. I'll catch you in the next video. Until then, remember, with great power comes great responsibility.